Her daughter let the dog pee on her bed and laughed about it. June Patterson, 72, didn't yell. She folded the wet sheets in silence. Claire, entitled and ungrateful, believed the house was already hers. By week's end, June would sign it away to someone Claire hated most. No shouting, no second chances, just paperwork and proof. And when eviction came, it wouldn't be rage. It'd be relief. Wait, before we go any further, I got to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. June Patterson opened the bedroom door with a gentle push of her hand, expecting quiet. Instead, the air met her with an acrid sting that caught at the back of her throat, an odor she recognized instantly. She froze, eyes narrowing in disbelief as she stepped into the doorway. The bed sheets on her side were soaked through with a dark stain, still glistening in the late afternoon light, slipping through the blinds. Nestled comfortably in the middle of the mess was Rocco, Claire's golden retriever, stretched out like he owned the place. His tail thudded lazily against the fabric, swatting the air without concern. He looked straight at her with that blank, guileless expression dogs have when they don't know or don't care what they've done. From the hallway, June heard the casual cadence of her daughter's voice, light and utterly unbothered. "Oops," Claire called out, not even pretending to walk in. "Guess he likes your smell or something." June didn't respond. She simply stood there, staring at the ruined bed she had made that morning, the scent of urine now sharp enough to sting her eyes. She took one slow breath, held it, then exhaled with restraint. A moment later, Claire appeared in the doorway, still scrolling on her phone, her thumbs tapping rhythmically across the screen. She glanced at the bed, then back to her notifications. "It's just an old mattress, Mom," she said with a short laugh. "Don't freak out." June turned her head slightly. "You're not going to clean it?" Claire blinked, then smirked without looking up. "Why would I? It's your bed." And then, as if to punctuate the point, she turned away and walked off, her laughter trailing behind her like perfume gone sour. Rocco shifted his weight, and in doing so, sent a paw crashing against the edge of the nightstand. A photo frame toppled and hit the floor with a crisp crack. June's eyes locked onto it, the old silver one with a picture of her and Robert on their 25th anniversary. The glass had fractured clean through the center of his face. For a few seconds, all she could do was stare. She crouched down slowly, lifting the frame and brushing her sleeve across the broken pane, careful not to cut her fingers. When she looked back up, Rocco was watching her. His tongue lolled out of his mouth as he started licking the wet patch again, unbothered by the damage he'd done. June moved to the bed and began stripping the sheets without a word. The fabric was heavy with dampness and humiliation. Every tug pulled up more evidence of her daughter's disregard, more proof of how little her space or her dignity mattered anymore. She worked with practiced motions, not out of calm, but because rage made her precise. Rage, she had learned, could become a tool if you held it steady enough. From down the hallway, Claire's voice drifted in again. "Seriously, though, he just peed, and she's acting like it's arson. People are so dramatic when they get old." June folded the soiled sheets and pressed them to her chest. The wetness seeped into her sweater, but she didn't flinch. She simply turned, walked out of the room, and headed toward the laundry. In the utility room, she placed the sheets carefully into the washer, selected the heaviest cycle, and poured in detergent with a level hand. She watched the machine spin to life, water filling up slowly. Her reflection stared back at her from the chrome trim. Older, yes, but far from weak. Claire's footsteps padded into the kitchen, followed by the slam of the refrigerator door. "We're out of almond milk," she shouted, as if this was June's personal failure. June didn't answer. She stared at the soft churn of water behind the glass, the rhythmic whoosh muffling everything else. Her hands rested on the edge of the machine, knuckles pale, body still. In that moment, standing between a broken photo, a ruined mattress, and a daughter who hadn't lifted a finger, June understood something with perfect clarity. Some messes aren't meant to be cleaned. Some lines, once crossed, deserve more than forgiveness. And this time, Claire wouldn't see the end coming until it was far too late to stop it. The next morning, June stood at the kitchen sink, mug in hand, eyes fixed on the small slice of the outside world framed by the window. The garden next door was alive with motion, deliberate, efficient, and silent. Sandra Phelps was out early, pruning her rose bushes with the same steely precision she used for everything. Her shears clipped rhythmically, one blossom at a time, as if she were disciplining the flowers themselves. Sandra's silver hair was pulled back tightly, her stance tall despite the stiffness in her knees. She wore a canvas apron stained with years of potting soil and trimmed thorns. Even from a distance, June could see how careful she was, cutting diagonally, inspecting the stems, moving clockwise through the garden bed, as if working from some unwritten rule book. There was something steady about it, repetitive, predictable, the exact opposite of what June's life inside the house had become. Her fingers tightened around the mug. For years, she and Sandra had danced around one another like cautious dogs, friendly when it suited them, cold when it didn't. But Claire had turned cool into cruel. That one afternoon came back to her now in harsh fragments. Claire on the porch steps, screaming across the hedges about a ridiculous noise complaint, her voice shrill and wild with entitlement. Sandra had stood her ground, lips pursed, saying little, letting the younger woman burn her own rope. Claire had cursed, slammed the gate, and told June afterward that the old bat next door could rot. After that, the silence between houses had thickened. Now, as June watched Sandra lean down to clear away fallen petals, a small, unexpected smile touched her lips. She turned away from the window, rinsed her cup, and dried her hands slowly. She wasn't wearing shoes when she stepped outside. The grass was still damp underfoot, the smell of morning earth curling up around her, like a scent memory from some other life. Each step toward the mailbox felt oddly deliberate, as if she were not just retrieving letters, but crossing a threshold she hadn't even known she was ready to pass. Behind her, the front door creaked open. "Hey!" Claire's voice carried across the yard, piercing and familiar. "We're out of almond milk again." June didn't stop, didn't look back. Her slippers brushed against the curb as she reached the box and pulled it open. Flyers, bills, a coupon from the hardware store. She tucked them under her arm, took a breath, and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a second before she began typing a message to Marcus. How complicated would it be to gift property? Like, quickly. She stared at the text for a moment, then hit send. A light breeze passed over the hedge between her yard and Sandra's. June turned slightly, almost unconsciously, and caught Sandra looking up from the roses. Their eyes met, no smiles, just a shared, exhausted understanding that passed through the quiet like a current. Sandra straightened, wiped her gloves on her apron, and gave a short, respectful nod. Nothing more. But it lingered in June's mind longer than any word Claire had said in weeks. She turned back toward the house and climbed the porch steps slowly. Inside, she could hear Claire's voice rising again, talking to someone on speaker, probably trashing her to a friend or a feed or whoever else wanted to listen. The noise blended with the ticking of the wall clock in the hall and the low hum of the refrigerator, forming the same dull, constant buzz that had become her daily soundtrack. June stepped inside, set the mail on the kitchen counter, and opened the freezer. The shelves were cluttered with Claire's half-finished vegan meals, boxes left open and frosted over, ingredients she didn't even recognize anymore. She closed the door gently, leaned her back against it, and looked around the room that used to feel like hers. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. "Marcus Weller, it's not complicated. It just has to be deliberate." June looked back toward the window. Sandra was still working, still pruning, still steady. And for the first time in weeks, June felt something click into place. Not anger, not frustration, but resolve. A deep, bone-deep knowing that she had allowed chaos too close for too long. It was time to reclaim what she had built, even if that meant handing it piece by piece to someone Claire couldn't stand. The coffee at Brightleaf Diner tasted the same way it always had, burnt, oversweetened, and served in mugs chipped at the rim. But it was the quiet that June noticed more than anything. No barking, no slamming cabinet doors, no voice reminding her what was missing from the fridge, just the hum of the refrigeration unit in back and the low murmur of other people's lives. Marcus Weller slid into the booth across from her, briefcase in hand, dark wool coat still buttoned despite the warm room. He looked exactly as he had the day she and Robert had first met him 20 years ago, sharp, measured, and with a tone that always implied he was a few steps ahead of whatever problem you brought him. He didn't offer small talk, just opened the latch on his case and said, "So, you want to move the house? Not sell it, gift it." June stirred her creamer into the coffee with slow, patient circles. "Not just a gift, a trust, one I can reverse if I want." Marcus raised an eyebrow, the paper files already shifting in his hands, revocable then, but with authority vested in someone else. "Someone outside my family," June said, voice even.
He didn't ask why.
She liked that about him. For the next 40 minutes, they reviewed the language. Marcus explained how the trust could transfer full living authority while keeping June's residency protected. He emphasized that once Claire was excluded, she had no legal standing to contest the arrangement, at least not successfully. June didn't ask about morality. That ship had sailed the moment Claire giggled at the smell of dog urine on her pillow. As Marcus slid the first draft across the table, June pulled a pen from her bag. Her initials moved slowly, but with conviction, across the top corner. Not the final signature yet, but a beginning. A quiet warning cloaked in paperwork. Marcus folded the document gently, slid it into a thick manila envelope, and paused. "You'll need a witness for the notarized version. Ideally, someone you trust." June looked past him out the diner window toward the rows of brick storefronts wrapped in winter garlands. She said nothing for a long moment, then nodded once. "I know who." That afternoon, Sandra opened the front door with the same weary posture she always had, shoulders squared, jaw set. For a moment, she looked ready to shut it again. "Tea, June," she said simply, holding up a tin of Earl Grey. "I brought the good kind." Sandra hesitated, then stepped aside without a word. The inside of Sandra's home was as precise as her garden. Furniture aligned to the edge of rugs. Photos of her children, now grown and far away, hung in perfect symmetry above the mantel. The scent of lemon polish lingered in the air. No mess, no noise, just stillness. They sat across from each other in stiff armchairs, the teacups resting between them like diplomatic offerings. Sandra's eyes, sharp as ever, didn't blink. "You and I haven't done this in 2 decades. Why now?" June studied her for a long beat, then replied, "Because you're consistent. That's a rare thing lately." Sandra gave the smallest twitch of a smile, then reached for the sugar bowl. The conversation moved slowly. Safe topics first. Neighborhood gossip. The church bake sale no one ever baked for. Then silence again. But it wasn't cold, just practiced. As they finished their tea, June reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the envelope Marcus had given her. She placed it gently on the table between them. Sandra glanced at it, then back at her. "Is that what I think it is?" June nodded. Sandra didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She simply leaned back in her chair and said, "Well, that's going to stir the hornet's nest." Outside, Rocco barked twice at nothing. The sound sliced through the window, irritating and constant. Sandra didn't even flinch. June picked up her empty teacup, set it in the saucer, and said with calm certainty, "Good." Let her sting herself. The rumble of an unfamiliar engine idling in the driveway woke Claire with a scowl. From her bedroom window, she could see the outline of a boxy blue sedan. Sandra's unmistakably square and unpolished. June was leaning against the porch column in her robe, arms crossed lightly as she spoke with a neighbor she'd sworn never to have over again. The two women stood close enough to suggest comfort, but with the kind of posture that hinted at business. Claire shoved the curtain aside with more force than needed. "What the hell?" she muttered to herself, tugging on her hoodie and yanking the door open. Rocco darted between her legs, already barking, nails clattering across the porch planks. "Hey!" Claire shouted, more to her mother than the dog. "What's she doing here?" Sandra didn't turn. She adjusted her sunglasses, then crouched briefly to pull a weed from the edge of the driveway like she hadn't heard a thing. June remained still, watching Claire approach with the mild, unreadable expression she'd taken to wearing lately. Quietly withholding a wall Claire couldn't scale. Claire clapped her hands once. "Rocco, come here." But the dog was already bounding towards Sandra's yard, tail wagging, nose low. Without hesitation, he plunged into the garden bed, snapping flower stalks as he galloped through, soil flying from under his paws. Sandra's head turned just slightly. "I swear to God if he pees," she began, but she didn't have to finish. Rocco stopped mid-bed, lifted a leg, and christened the base of her hydrangeas like they were his rightful target. Claire didn't move to stop him. If anything, her arms folded across her chest in defiance. "That's a 10-year-old hydrangea bush," Sandra said evenly, eyes locked on June. "Now you'd better keep that animal away from my yard." June's lips parted in a half-smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll want to be careful, Claire," she said softly. "Those roses might be yours soon." Claire blinked. "What does that mean?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Her tone had shifted, suddenly sharper, unnerved. June pushed away from the column and descended the porch steps. She was still in slippers, but she walked with intention, shoulders squared and chin lifted. Her gaze passed briefly over the torn garden, then met Claire's without flinching. "I had a meeting yesterday," she said calmly. "About the house?" Claire laughed short and disbelieving. "You can't change the will without telling me." June raised an eyebrow. "You're assuming this is about the will." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Isn't it?" "No," June replied. "It's a transfer entirely separate, legal, immediate." For a moment, silence bloomed between them, thick and pressurized. Claire's face flushed. "You can't just give away my future. That's not how this works." Sandra cleared her throat behind them, her tone dry as a Kentucky summer. "Maybe it's not your future anymore, sweetheart." Claire whipped around. "You don't get to." But June stepped between them, not in protection, but in boundary. "I'm not asking for your blessing, Claire. I'm reclaiming my decision-making. Something you've treated like furniture, comfortable, invisible, already yours." Claire opened her mouth, but no words came. Behind them, Rocco barked again and took off after a squirrel, nearly toppling a clay bird bath in his pursuit. The crack of ceramic hitting stone echoed across the cul-de-sac. Sandra turned back toward her car, without another word. June didn't follow. She simply stood still in the middle of the lawn, letting the tension settle around her like a coat that finally fit again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Marcus was probably confirming the notary appointment. Claire stared after Sandra's car as it reversed gently out of the driveway and into the street, disappearing toward town. She looked back at June, eyes blazing. But June's face remained calm. And this time, when she turned to walk inside, she didn't look back. The dining table had never seen such solemnity, not even during Robert's wake. Now, instead of casseroles and condolence cards, it held a neat stack of legal documents, a state-issued notary stamp, and 3 pens aligned like surgical tools. The mid-morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, catching the gold trim of June's china cabinet as if the house itself were leaning in to witness. Sandra sat upright at the far end, hands folded, lips pressed into a neutral line. Marcus stood beside her, flipping the pages one last time, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked calm, professional, but his eyes tracked every movement with practiced attention. June sat at the head of the table. Her hand hovered briefly above the signature line before landing softly, deliberately, and signing her name with a careworn nod of doubt, but finality. "Is that it?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "It's official. Witnessed, stamped, filed by end of day." She leaned back, exhaled once through her nose. Not relief, something colder, cleaner, like wiping a fog mirror and seeing yourself clearly for the first time in years. Sandra reached for the pen Marcus had set down and twirled it between her fingers. She didn't look at June when she said it, just stared down at the document like it was a loaded weapon. "Hell just froze over, huh?" June smiled faintly. Only took 41 years. The front door slammed. Claire stormed in, earbuds still in, hair tangled. Rocco bounded at her heels with a burst of energy that immediately collided with the chair legs. June didn't move. Claire ripped the buds out, tossing them on the entry table. You left his leash outside again. He almost ran into traffic. June didn't rise. You'll need to clean up the rug. He tracked mud all the way through the foyer. Claire threw her hands up. Jesus, are you kidding me? You're just sitting here while the dog ruins everything, and I'm supposed to clean it. Sandra arched an eyebrow without saying a word. She seemed to fold further into her seat, but her eyes glittered. Marcus remained standing, his briefcase already closed. Claire's eyes darted from one face to another. What the hell is this? She asked, voice rising. Why are they both here? June stood up slowly, straightening the fabric of her cardigan. This isn't your meeting, Claire. Claire scoffed. It's my house, too, you know. No, June said, her voice even and unhurried. It's not. Claire blinked. I'm your daughter. And daughters aren't entitled to property they didn't earn. You've mistaken comfort for control. Claire's mouth opened, but before she could speak, Marcus stepped forward and handed June a stamped copy of the trust. I'll walk this to the courthouse now, he said. It'll be recorded before close of business, effective immediately. Claire's eyes locked on the paper. What is that? June turned it slightly toward her. A transfer of full property authority. The house no longer belongs to me in the way you assumed it did. Claire grabbed the edge of the table, stunned into silence for a rare and fragile moment. Then came the laugh, nervous, ugly, jagged. So, you're just giving it away to her? She jabbed a finger toward Sandra. That's what this is. June tilted her head. No, Claire. I'm giving it back to peace. Claire snatched her phone from her pocket and marched toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath as she opened her camera app. Let's see how TikTok feels about this one. Mom goes senile. Gives house to nosy neighbor. This will blow up. She lifted the phone in one hand and twirled in front of the cabinets, the lens catching the familiar kitchen tile behind her. June didn't move. Sandra, finally rising from her seat, stepped toward the door with a smirk, tugging at the corner of her mouth. She didn't say goodbye, just murmured, half to herself, half for the room, can't wait to see her go viral from someone else's kitchen. June didn't laugh, but she did watch. As Marcus followed Sandra out and the front door clicked shut behind them, June turned to face the sunlight spilling across the hardwood. Rocco had fallen asleep by the couch, snoring softly, and Claire, still filming, didn't even notice the paper on the table had her name nowhere on it. The sound of cardboard scraping against hardwood echoed faintly down the hallway as June pulled another box from beneath her bed. She moved slowly, not from age, but deliberation. Each item she packed came with a decision. Keep, donate, or trash. Her late husband's old cufflinks?
Keep.
A box of expired greeting cards from Claire's forgotten birthdays?
Trash.
A dusty pair of ballet flats she hadn't worn since the Obama administration? Donate. The process wasn't nostalgic. It was surgical. She folded a flannel blanket and placed it neatly into the box marked spare linens. The room, once cozy with clutter, now felt bare and humming with quiet intent. Every cleared corner was a message. Every emptied drawer a boundary redrawn. Down the hallway, Claire's voice rang out. Why is the neighbor measuring the yard with a tape measure? June didn't answer. She could already picture it. Sandra in her fleece jacket and garden clogs, stepping out, confident as ever. Yellow measuring tape pulled taut across the far fence line. No clipboard, no apology, just data collection. The roses were blooming early this year, and Sandra wasn't going to let property lines catch her off guard. Claire appeared in the doorway minutes later, barefoot, arms crossed. Is she like building something? June didn't look up from her packing. She's just checking boundaries. Claire's scoff came with a half laugh. She would, then she turned and left, muttering something under her breath that June didn't bother to catch. By mid-afternoon, the scent of onions and beef simmering in red wine filled the house. The slow cooker burbled gently on the counter, while June stirred in herbs with the kind of care Claire reserved for her hair extensions. Chunks of carrots softened into the broth as the heat thickened it all into something rich and deep. It was Robert's favorite stew, once made in double batches, always enough for leftovers. But this time, June ladled only one serving. She set the table for herself, polished silverware gleaming beside a folded napkin, and ate in silence while Claire stomped around the living room, opening cupboards and sighing dramatically. "You didn't save me any," Claire finally called from the kitchen, her voice pitched high with disbelief. June didn't answer. She just sipped her iced tea and watched the condensation bead down the side of a glass. Later that night, when June came out from brushing her teeth, her slippers were gone. She checked the usual spots: the side of the bed, the bathroom door, under the vanity. Nothing. In the hallway, Claire lounged on the couch, one leg draped over the armrest, scrolling aimlessly. "Looking for something?" she asked without looking up. "My slippers," June said evenly. Claire shrugged. "Oh, I think Rocco dragged them into the yard. Or maybe I tossed them. They smelled like old cereal." A fake smile followed. "My bad." June said nothing. She turned and walked back to her room, locking the door behind her for the first time in years. The click of the bolt was louder than she'd expected. It settled in the silence like punctuation, an end to a paragraph that had dragged on too long. She slept with the bedside lamp on, her robe folded beside her like armor. Rocco barked once in the hallway around midnight, but June didn't rise to quiet him. In the morning, she found a flat envelope slipped under her door. Her name was written across the front in Marcus's clean, slanted hand. She peeled it open to find a crisp spiral-bound copy of the full transfer documentation, stamped, indexed, notarized, and legally sealed. She ran her hand along the embossed header. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Official, permanent. She walked to the closet, pulled out the fireproof safe, and opened it with the code she hadn't changed since Robert's funeral. His documents were still there. His will, their insurance paperwork, their old deed. She slid his file to the side and tucked the trust papers into the center slot. New label, title, Phelps outside. A car door slammed. Sandra again. June rose slowly, brushing her hands down the front of her sweater, and walked toward the window. This time, she wasn't hiding the file. She was just waiting to see what Claire would do when she finally realized it existed. The porch door banged open, so hard it rattled the glass. Claire burst out barefoot, hair knotted in a lazy bun, face flushed and uneven with sleep and fury. Her phone dangled from one hand, forgotten, the screen still glowing with an unanswered text. June, kneeling by the Elas with a trowel in hand, didn't look up. "Did you give her the house?" The words hit the air like a slap. Shrill, high-pitched, already echoing before Claire had fully stepped outside. June pressed the head of the trowel into the soil. A slow breath escaped her lips. Then, finally, she turned to face her daughter. "I gave it to someone," she said evenly. "Who doesn't let dogs pee on my bed?" Claire's hands clenched so hard the phone creaked. "Are you serious right now? You just handed everything over to that bitter hag next door." Behind the screen door, Rocco let out a confused bark and padded into view. The tension outside was thick enough to choke on. Claire took one step down onto the porch and looked around like the house itself might talk back. "You've completely lost it. No one in their right mind would." Her voice broke with something feral. "You think she deserves this house?" June stood up slowly, brushing soil from her gloves. "I think she respects what she didn't build. That's more than I can say for you." Claire moved without thinking. Her hand shot out toward the porch table, grabbed the ceramic mug June had left there earlier. Half-drunk coffee, a faded blue glaze, the one with a chip in the handle. She hurled it hard. The mug slammed against the railing and shattered across the steps, porcelain spraying like shrapnel into the flower bed below. Rocco yelped and darted under the table, tail tucked between his legs, his body quaking with confusion. Claire didn't even glance at him. Across the yard, Sandra's head rose slowly over the hedge. She had garden gloves on and a rusted pair of clippers in her hand, as if she'd been mid-prune when the scene snapped into focus. She raised her voice with the kind of calm only retired women and detectives had mastered. "Should I call the police, or is it your turn this time?" Claire's neck whipped toward her. "Stay out of it, you nosy." "Careful," June cut in, tone like ice cracking underfoot. "You're trespassing on someone else's nerves." Sandra didn't flinch. She just leaned her hip against a fence post and watched as if she'd seen 100 tantrums of her life, and this one barely cracked the top 10. June stepped back inside without another word. Claire remained frozen on the porch, chest heaving, shards of ceramic crunching underfoot. Inside the house, Rocco whined softly from beneath the table but didn't dare move. In the kitchen, June wiped her hands clean with a dish towel and opened her laptop. She navigated to the router dashboard with practiced efficiency. Claire had never bothered to set her own password, just leached off the household Wi-Fi like she did everything else. June changed the network name to Private Property 72. New password. You were warned. With a soft click, she hit apply changes. From the porch came Claire's frustrated shriek. "What the hell? My streaming just froze." June poured herself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher and sipped slowly. Upstairs, the Bluetooth speaker in Claire's room cut out. A thud followed, then another. "Mom, the Wi-Fi, are you serious?" June didn't answer. She walked into the living room and turned the old analog radio to a soft country station. Something twanged gently in the background while Claire stormed back inside, phone raised like a weapon, buffering screen glaring back at her. "I have stuff to post," she barked. "I have live followers waiting." June flipped the page of her crossword. "Then I guess they'll wait in silence." Claire stared at her, a wildness forming in her eyes that didn't quite match the woman she used to be. Something was cracking now, something Claire had taken for granted too long. And for the first time in their fractured history, June had no urge to fix it. The first thing Claire noticed was the water, specifically the lack of it. The shower hissed once, coughed, and then let out a pathetic dribble that sputtered down to a useless trickle. She stood there soaked, shampoo lather ghosting down her shoulders, blinking at the shower head like it had betrayed her on purpose. "Mom," she screamed, towel wrapped and furious, banging down the hallway barefoot. "The water's off. The entire house is dry." From the kitchen, June answered with a quiet, "It's not the house." Claire rounded the corner and froze. June stood calmly at the stove, stirring a saucepan with one hand while sipping tea from her favorite mug with the other. She didn't look over. Claire blinked. "What the hell does that mean?" June placed the lid gently on the pot and turned to face her daughter. Her tone was cool, practiced. "The utilities in this house are in my name, except the one for your room and bath. That account has always been separate for tracking usage." Claire's mouth fell open. "I shut it off this morning," June added. It felt appropriate. Claire laughed. It was a short, brittle sound like glass under pressure. "You shut off my water because I broke a mug." June lifted one shoulder in a shrug. "I shut it off because you've broken too many things and paid for none of them." Claire stormed back upstairs, wet feet slapping angrily on the hardwood. Rocco barked once and darted behind the couch, as if he could feel the storm brewing. By early afternoon, Sandra had made her move. Claire was outside, pacing in circles, still damp, still ranting on a call with her friend Lacey, when she spotted the envelope in the mailbox. She pulled it out and stared. Inside was a single sheet of thick laminated paper, the courthouse seal pressed at the bottom. June's name was removed entirely. Above it, in bold black ink, was a single line: "Trust holder Sandra Phelps." Claire's breath hitched. She looked toward the hedge. Sandra stood casually near the fence, hose in hand, watering the rosemary like nothing in the world had changed. She didn't wave. She didn't smirk. She simply nodded once, the way people nod at a completed chore. Claire tore the paper in half, then into fourths, then again into confetti she let fall on the lawn. But the pieces wouldn't unlaminate. They curled, stiff and shiny, catching the breeze and scattering like proof. Inside, June logged into Facebook for the first time in months. She didn't scroll, didn't like, didn't reply. She clicked the little blue status box and typed 4 words, "Ownership is peace." She didn't tag anyone, no hashtags, no images. She simply posted and logged out. Ellie arrived just after sunset, wrapped in a puffy vest and holding a paper bag filled with lemon shortbread cookies. She hugged June at the door, long and tight, then pulled back, eyes wide with disbelief. "She's really gone off the deep end, hasn't she?" June nodded once, the lines around her mouth softening for the first time all week. "I saw the post," Ellie said. "I wasn't sure if it meant what I hoped it meant." "It did," June replied. "Sandra holds it now." Ellie let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's poetic." They sat at the table with mugs of tea and shared cookies while the house creaked softly around them. Outside, Claire's voice rose through the dark again, this time through the kitchen window where she was pacing in the backyard, foam clutched to her ear like a lifeline. "I don't know what to do, Doug. She gave my house away to the neighbor, the woman who tried to report us for dog noise. This is psychotic. It's elder abuse in reverse." June looked toward the window, but didn't get up. Ellie's hand found hers across the table. "You okay?" Ellie asked. "I'm getting there." They both looked toward the sound of Claire's sobs as she sank onto the porch steps, phone still to her ear, voice cracking into pieces. From across the hedge, Sandra's porch light flicked on. One by one, things were shifting. June could feel it. Not just in the paperwork, not just in the silence, but in the way the house was finally starting to feel like hers again. The envelope Claire served to June arrived in the most laughable way possible, wedged under the doormat, half crumpled from being stepped on by the mailman. The return address belonged to a local legal clinic, the kind that specialized in personal disputes, contested wills, and emotionally charged tantrums dressed up as claims. June opened it without a blink. She read the letter in full once, then again slower, sipping her tea between paragraphs. Then she folded it neatly, placed it into a zippered binder already labeled Claire Response, and picked up the landline to call Marcus. Across town, he answered before the second ring. "I was wondering when she'd try to throw her last matchstick," he said. "She's not going to like what's about to happen." Marcus prepared the defense like he was building a wall, brick by brick. Tight, clean, impenetrable. June delivered him every piece he asked for, every time-stamped social media post, screenshots of Claire's online bragging about her free ride, the video of her laughing outside June's room the morning Rocco ruined the bed, and the photos, clear, sharp, dated. The urine stain, the broken frame, the wrecked linens folded on the floor like proof of neglect that had long since turned into contempt. Marcus labeled each exhibit with calm precision. "She's not going after the estate. She's trying to claim mental incompetence, coercion, and unfair emotional duress." June had only smiled. "I hope she spells duress right." Sandra showed up to the courthouse in a linen blazer and gardening shoes. When the clerk asked if she was there as support, she snapped, "No, I'm a witness." Her statement was delivered with a raised chin and zero ambiguity. On the stand, Sandra was controlled, articulate, and wickedly honest. "I heard the daughter scream at her," she told the judge. "More than once. I saw the dog destroy her property. I watched June clean up after her grown child like it was normal. That house stopped feeling like hers years ago, and she's taking it back the only peaceful way available." The judge didn't blink once. Claire, sitting across the courtroom in a wrinkled pantsuit she clearly borrowed, shot Sandra a venomous glare that bounced off her like a tennis ball hitting brick. 10 minutes later, the gavel struck. The case was dismissed with prejudice. Claire had no legal standing. The trust was airtight. The judge didn't even ask for a recess. It was over before Claire could even adjust her tone. She stood frozen, mouth slightly open, the courtroom tilting around her like a dream gone sideways. June stood and gathered her purse with one hand, the binder tucked under her arm like a final act of order. As she passed by, she paused briefly. "That's the thing about ownership," she said softly. "It's not just legal, it's earned." Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. That night, The group text that Claire once used to show off her forever kitchen life pinged to life with a new comment. Doug, her ex-husband. He'd seen the hearing transcript circulating online. A friend had posted Sandra's testimony on a neighborhood forum. Claire's name trended on local Facebook pages for all the wrong reasons. Doug's comment, in classic Doug fashion, was short and brutal. Damn, karma's a force. Claire didn't reply. She left the group 3 minutes later. The next morning, Rocco was gone. A post-it note sat on the kitchen island. Claire's handwriting, rushed and angry. I couldn't afford the food, let alone the vet. He's with a rescue now. Hope you're happy. The leash still hung on the back of the door like a ghost limb. June removed it quietly, then placed it in the box marked Donate. She didn't ask Sandra. She didn't call Ellie. She just stood at the window looking out across her quiet, measured yard. For the first time in what felt like years, the silence inside the house didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. The notice came in a stiff manila envelope hand-delivered by Sandra herself. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the doorbell. She simply placed it on the doormat, adjusted it so the notice to vacate headline was visible through the screen, and walked back down the steps like she was returning garden shears, not evicting a person. Claire didn't find it until noon. She'd been holed up in her room all morning, blinds drawn, scrolling through legal forums and subreddit threads about reversing property transfers. She still hadn't accepted that the courthouse wasn't a cliffhanger. It was the ending. When she opened the door and saw the letter, she snatched it up like a threat and tore it open in one ragged pull. Her eyes scanned the legalese quickly, then again slower, disbelief turning to something more primal. 30 days, no appeal, no loophole. The house wasn't hers anymore. Not even technically. Sandra held the deed. June still lived there by invitation. Claire didn't live there at all. Not anymore. Outside, the sun cast long lines across the porch. The quiet neighborhood watched with its usual polite distance, but Claire didn't care. She stormed down the front walk in slippers, waving the notice in one hand like a protest sign. Mom, she screamed, voice cracking. You're seriously okay with this? You're going to let her throw me out? June didn't answer right away. She was on her knees near the back fence, planting spring bulbs into the newly turned earth. Her gloves were caked in soil. The sweat on her brow made her look not tired, but alive. Claire came around the side yard, breathing heavy. You're actually letting her do this? June stood slowly and peeled off one glove. She didn't meet her daughter's eyes right away, just looked out across the yard where daffodils were beginning to peek through the earth like fragile promises. I would have given you everything, June said at last, her voice low but steady. You gave me nothing but mess. Claire blinked, stunned. I'm your daughter. You were, then you became a tenant and not a good one. The silence that followed was deep and strange. No shouting, no one running after anyone, just the sound of a blue jay shrieking from the neighbor's chimney and a light breeze tugging at the hem of Claire's sweatshirt. For the first time in her life, Claire looked small. By the weekend, the boxes had started stacking by the front door. Ellie came by with Ruth, a longtime friend of the family, who had packed more church bake sale leftovers than moving tape. But she was quick and kind, and June liked having her there. Claire wasn't much help. She wandered through the house like a sleepwalker, pausing every few minutes to pick up something and stare at it blankly before setting it down again. She kept the front door open, even when no one was outside, like she was expecting someone to come stop her. But no one did. The neighbors started waving to June again. They nodded from driveways, gave small, knowing smiles when she passed their hedges with gardening gloves on. A few even brought over pies. It felt like an apology for all the years they hadn't asked if she was okay. Ruth lifted another box into the trunk. She always this dramatic? Ellie gave a soft laugh. Only when the script stops working. Inside, June opened a lower cabinet and pulled out Rocco's old food bowl. She stared at it for a long time. The chipped edge, the faded letters that once spelled, "Good boy," in peeling red print. It smelled faintly of old kibble and bleach. She walked it out to the bin and dropped it in without ceremony. The hollow clang echoed into the driveway where Claire stood, arms crossed, watching. I loved that dog, Claire said flatly. Then you should have kept him, June replied without looking back. Claire didn't say goodbye when she left. There was no dramatic monologue, no last-minute apology, no hug that clung just long enough to mean something. She simply loaded the last of her boxes into the back of a battered U-Haul, slammed the lift gate shut, and drove off with a screech that sounded more desperate than defiant. The only sound left in her wake was the dry rustle of the empty, not my problem anymore energy she'd worn like perfume since high school. June watched from the upstairs window, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the sill. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, steady and still until the truck turned the corner and disappeared behind the maples. When the dust settled, the silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was earned. June stripped the guest linens from her bed that afternoon, the ones Claire had slept on when she first moved back in. She tossed them into a donation bin and pulled out a crisp white set she'd been saving for years, still sealed, still folded with factory precision. As she spread them across the mattress, the smell of lavender fabric softener filled the room. She changed the photo frame too, the one Claire had knocked over during that first argument about the dog. The cracked glass was gone now. A new frame stood in its place, silver again, but clean and whole. Robert smiled up at her from inside it, frozen in time at their 35th anniversary dinner. His hand was resting on her shoulder. She touched the image gently. I got it done, she whispered. Outside, Sandra stood at her rose bushes in a wide-brimmed straw hat, watering can tilted just enough to mimic effort, but not intention. June stepped out onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and called her name. Sandra looked up, squinting against the sun. June raised 1 mug. Still prefer yours black? Sandra walked over, took the mug, and leaned against the railing. They didn't toast, just sipped quietly side by side. Sandra finally broke the silence. You keeping it empty for now? June shook her head. I'll post the listing tomorrow. Short-term room, month to month, but one requirement. Sandra arched an eyebrow. Which is? June took another sip. Respect required. Sandra let out a quiet laugh deep in her throat. You should embroider that on a pillow. I might. Later that evening, Ellie arrived with 2 cans of eggshell paint and an old tarp folded under one arm. She wore her painting jeans, the ones splattered with blue from when she'd redone her own apartment, and smiled as she held up a brush. I brought reinforcements, she said. They tackled the kitchen together, brushing over the grease-stained yellow walls with a clean, calming gray. The cabinets got a fresh coat of white, the trim a soft almond. As they painted, the light changed, warm gold melting into a cooler dusk. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was light. The kind of conversation where silence didn't mean avoidance, only comfort. By the time the last cabinet dried, the room looked different, not just cleaner, quieter, as if it had finally been allowed to exhale. At dusk, June stood by the front door and looked out over the now empty driveway. A soft wind carried the scent of mulch and honeysuckle. The porch lights flickered on one by one down the street.
No yelling, no barking, no stomping upstairs.
She closed the door slowly, turned the bolt, and rested her hand on the cool brass knob for a moment longer than needed. Then she walked away. No footsteps behind her. No voice calling her back, just peace. The morning sun stretched long and golden across the backyard as June pressed her trowel into the soil, gloved hands steady, movements unrushed. Beside her, Sandra worked in tandem, separating root balls with a practiced flick of the wrist, the 2 women moving in a rhythm that didn't need words. They had fallen into a kind of quiet partnership, watering, planting, weeding, trading snips of conversation like seeds. Sandra's sarcasm had softened around the edges. June's reserve had melted just enough to show the humor underneath. I still say marigolds are aggressive, Sandra muttered, eyeing a patch with suspicion. June smirked. They keep the deer away. Sandra snorted. So does a shotgun. They kept working. By noon, the flower beds near the fence were fresh and orderly, and the lavender patch had begun to buzz faintly with bees. The backyard looked like it belonged to people who lived with care, not people surviving chaos. A folding table had been set up in the center of the lawn, covered in a checkered cloth. Ellie arrived with fresh bagels and lemonade, her arms full and her smile wide. Ruth came too, bringing deviled eggs and a folding chair she insisted was older than any of them. Even Mr. Leland, from 3 doors down, wandered over with a thermos of black coffee and a lemon pound cake his late wife used to bake every Easter. The brunch wasn't elaborate, but it was peaceful, and that made it sacred. They laughed about small things. The time Sandra's sprinkler soaked a UPS driver, June's accidental trip to a silent yoga class, Ellie's misadventure with an online date. Who brought his mother? No one brought up Claire.
No one needed to.
After the dishes were cleared and the guests drifted off, June brought out a worn shoebox marked Photos 1980s and set it on the back step. The lid came off with a small pop, and a handful of glossy memories spilled into Sandra's lap. There were shots of barbecues, Halloween costumes, 4th of July parades. One picture made Sandra stop cold. In it, she was younger, maybe early 40s, caught mid-laugh at a block party, a paper plate in one hand, the other on Robert's shoulder. He was grinning, eyes crinkled in that way that made people trust him without asking why. Sandra stared at the photo for a long time. "I forgot this even existed," she whispered. "You cried when he won the chili cook-off that year," June said gently. "And then you accused him of rigging it." Sandra didn't laugh. She blinked instead, then looked away and wiped her eye with the side of her hand. "He was the only man in the neighborhood who didn't talk down to me," she said. "Even when I was shouting, he liked your fire," June replied. "He said you didn't pretend to be nice. He liked that." They sat there for another moment, surrounded by the scent of fresh mulch and old memories. Then June nudged the photo box aside and stood. "Come on," she said. "I want to show you something." At the far end of the yard, beneath the old elm, June pointed to a freshly cleared patch of dirt. A small wooden bench sat there, its legs still coated in sawdust, the varnish just barely dry. "I had Ellie's cousin build it," she said. No plaque, no inscription, just this. Sandra ran her hand across the seat, fingers catching in the wood grain. "What's it for?" June looked at her. "Peace." They sat down together. The bench held. The breeze picked up. From the corner of the street, a familiar car coasted by. Claire, windows up, sunglasses on. She didn't stop, just slowed enough to see the 2 women on the bench, heads close mid-laugh. Then she rolled through and kept going. Sandra noticed but said nothing. June only smiled. The email had been printed years ago, back when June still believed in keeping receipts. She found it tucked in a file marked Claire Finances, yellowed slightly at the corners. The toner faded but legible. The subject line read, "Don't worry, I'll get the house anyway." It had been sent in the early morning hours of some long ago Tuesday. Claire's name glared from the top. The message itself was short, smug, and full of misspelled confidence, an afterthought text forwarded from her phone, bragging to a friend about locking in her future. June stood on the back patio, a shallow metal tray balanced in her hands. The morning was breezy, soft-edged. Sandra was off running errands. Ellie had a church board meeting. The backyard was hers for the moment. She placed the paper in the tray, struck a match, and lowered it until the flame caught. It curled fast, black at the edges, then gold. Words disappeared, then letters, then name. June didn't move until the fire died to ash. She set the tray down and leaned forward, letting the flakes drift between her fingers. Some floated up, caught in a breeze, scattering across the yard like pieces of a narrative that had finally stopped mattering. Sandra arrived an hour later, holding a bouquet. It wasn't store-bought. It wasn't perfect, just fresh stems from her garden. Daffodils, thyme sprigs, a spray of lilac, all tied together with twine. She handed it over, without preamble. "Congratulations," she said, eyes sharp but kind. "Counter." June smiled and held the bouquet close. "You always show up at the right time." "I like showing up," Sandra replied. "Especially when it's not to pull weeds out of your elas." They laughed. That afternoon, Ellie stopped by with a thermos of green tea and an idea too big for her tote bag. "I want to record something," she said, setting up her phone on the porch railing. Just a short clip for the community feature we're putting together. Local women who lead quiet revolutions. You don't have to say much. June hesitated, then nodded once. Just don't let me sound like I rehearse. They filmed at the kitchen table. June wore a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, the sunlight behind her soft as memory. She spoke slowly about boundaries, about noise, about the things you think you have to accept just because you're used to them. You don't need to make a scene to make a change, she said at one point. You just need to stop apologizing for choosing peace. Ellie posted it to the community page that evening. By morning, the clip had been reshared over 200 times. Local papers asked for follow-ups. A podcast host emailed Ellie. The title, How to Take Back What's Yours at 72, trended on 2 platforms within 24 hours. Comments flooded in. Needed this more than I can say. My mom sent me this. I cried. Be like June. And then came Claire. Her profile photo was still the filtered selfie she used for old brand collaborations. Head tilted, lips pursed. Her comment, buried among the hundreds, read, "Y'all don't know the whole story. She manipulated the whole thing. She's not innocent." She tried to post again, but the screen returned the same line, clean and absolute. You've been blocked from commenting.
Claire stared at it for a long time.
On June's end, she never saw it. She was sitting out on the porch with Sandra and Ellie, sharing crackers and cold tea, watching the last of the daylight pour over the fence like honey. Her phone buzzed once, then twice, but she didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She'd already said what mattered, and the world, for once, had listened. The bed felt different now, not just because the sheets were new, crisp cotton with tiny blue pinstripes, but because nothing underneath them carried the smell of shame or resentment, or a dog she hadn't invited into her space. June lay back slowly, arms folded beneath her head, eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the ceiling. For once, they didn't feel like flaws, just history. No barking, no stomping upstairs, just the gentle hum of the refrigerator drifting in from the kitchen and the faint rustle of curtains responding to an open window. She turned on her side, let her hand trail across the edge of the mattress, where the memory of Claire's old mess used to live. That part of the bed had been washed, bleached, and washed again. It smelled like lemon and laundry soap now. It smelled like permission. Down the hall, the soft clink of plates being set told her Sandra was already in the kitchen. June sat up slowly, pulled on her sweater, and padded barefoot to the kitchen where the light was golden and low, the kind that made wood floors look like honey. Sandra turned from the counter, holding a plate in both hands. I saved you the last slice, she said, sliding it across the table. Chocolate coconut, not too sweet. June smiled. That's the best kind of sweet. Sandra raised her mug, coffee already half gone, and waited. June picked up her glass of water, cold and clean from the filter pitcher, and held it out. They tapped rims to boundaries. June said, pausing just a beat, and bleach. Sandra let out a small laugh. You're dangerous when you're rested. That's the point. They sat together for a while, the kitchen quiet, except for the occasional scrape of fork against ceramic. The fridge clicked softly behind them. The room didn't need anything more. Later that day, Ellie popped in with her tablet tucked under one arm and a stack of mail in the other. I signed you up for a few things, she said cheerfully, kicking off her shoes by the door. Weekly grocery delivery. No contact. Just fresh produce and whatever else you like. Milk, bread, orange juice, that yogurt you always forget to buy. I don't forget. June protested mildly. You forget, Ellie said. Now you don't have to. She opened a fridge and began rearranging the shelves with quiet authority. June didn't stop her. For once, letting someone help didn't feel like defeat. It felt like editing. You okay if I set up autopay on your gas bill, too? June shrugged. At this point, you might as well adopt me. Ellie grinned. Only if you behave. They both laughed, and the sound settled warmly into the corners of the kitchen, into the clean grout lines, the freshly painted cabinets, the scent of lemon oil still lingering from the last deep clean. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt selective. June leaned back against the doorframe as Ellie typed in card numbers and set delivery windows. From the backyard came the faint clang of Sandra's spade against stone, her usual war with the garden's gnarled corner patch. There was no shouting, no spilled dog kibble, no eye rolls, just people who asked before entering a room, who offered instead of demanded, who wiped their feet. And still, something inside June held alert like a bird too long caged, unsure if the open window really meant flight. She walked back to her bedroom just before dusk, paused at the doorway and looked in. The bed was still made, still clean, still hers. She turned off the light, climbed under the covers and closed her eyes. Not to block anything out, but to rest fully, finally, in what she'd fought to reclaim. In the silence, her phone buzzed once. She didn't check it. She already knew who it wasn't. The scent of rosemary and lemon cake drifted across the backyard as June poured another cup of tea. Steam curled from the spout like ribbon, catching the soft light of late spring as it filtered through the oak branches overhead. The garden was in bloom. Sun-warmed, wild in just the right places. Bees hovered lazily over lavender. The chairs, mismatched but charming, circled the folding table covered in a pale linen cloth. Ellie leaned back in her seat, barefoot in the grass, eyes closed behind her sunglasses. "This is the best it's ever looked," she murmured. "The yard, the house, you." Sandra, next to her, reached for a scone and nodded toward the freshly painted shed. "Funny how we got here." June didn't smile, but her gaze softened. "Not funny," she said quietly, slicing her lemon tart with perfect precision. Faded around them. Laughter stirred the hedges as Mr. Leland cracked a joke about his second ex-wife's gardening attempts, and Ruth chased a napkin dancing away on the breeze. There was no tension, no sulking from the porch, no shrill interruptions, just people who'd chosen to show up with hands clean and hearts unarmed. June excused herself before dessert and stepped back into the house. She moved through the rooms with a kind of reverence, not nostalgia. Everything had been reclaimed. The paint no longer bore smudges or handprints. The thermostat held steady where she set it. The refrigerator was full of her groceries, labeled and rotated by choice, not by the chaos of someone else's whim. In her bedroom, she opened the fireproof safe. The deed sat near the top, tucked in its own folder, the paper crisp, corners sharp, the courthouse seal intact. June took a pen from the top drawer of her nightstand, pulled out a blank adhesive label, and wrote slowly in clear block letters. Gifted with reason, she stuck it neatly on the front of the folder and slid the deed back inside between a letter from Robert she still hadn't reread and a copy of her will Ellie had helped notarize. Then she locked the safe with a quiet click. Back outside, the party had mellowed into stories and second helpings. Ellie met her at the door carrying something long and flat wrapped in brown butcher paper. "Housewarming/closure gift," she said. "From me and Sandra. You can't say no. We already drilled the holes." June peeled back the paper. It was a wooden sign, smooth and painted cream with a single phrase in charcoal script. "Loved, not lived on." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She brushed her thumb over the first letter like it might smudge. "Over the door?" she asked softly. Ellie nodded. "So no one forgets." They hung it together that evening just above the inside of the front doorway. The final nail went in without resistance. Sandra stayed after the others had gone, helping to stack dishes and wrap leftovers. They shared a glass of white wine in the kitchen barefoot, the porch light casting a warm halo across the floor. "You know," Sandra said, "you could have fought her tooth and nail, dragged it out, screamed back." June looked at her over the rim of her glass. "I did something better," she said. Sandra raised her glass. "You let her lose by herself." "No," June said, tapping her glass lightly against Sandra's. "I just stopped helping her win." The wind shifted. Something soft knocked against the back screen door, probably a loose blossom or a stray leaf, but no one tensed. No one flinched. Later, when Sandra had gone and the dishwasher hummed behind her, June took one last walk through the house. The light was low now, gold giving way to silver. She paused in the hallway, hand resting just beneath the new sign. Outside, a car crept past the curb, dark windows, engine low, a silhouette at the wheel. It didn't stop, just slowed, then rolled on into the night. June turned off the light and let the door ease close behind her. And as she stepped into her bedroom, peeled back the sheets, and climbed into her clean, quiet bed, the words came. Not angry, not bitter, just the simple truth, spoken aloud for no one but herself. She let the dog pee on my bed. So I gave the whole house to someone who knew better than to.